Hey, party people. Welcome to my super geeky new fashion design tutorial series on design principles applied to fashion design. Now, listen, okay, first of all, I don't like a long intro, but this one, it's important. It's full of information, so please pay attention. Number one, I didn't make up design principles. I would love to take credit, but I didn't. They are principles that exist. These concepts are things like balance, proportion, rhythm, unity, variety, and more, several more. And they are taught in art schools all over the world to students studying all different kinds, different disciplines of art and design. These principles are applied to graphic design, fine art composition, photography, car design, everything. And in this series, I'm going to show you how design principles apply to fashion design, mainly clothing design, because that is my area of expertise. And in order to really understand design principles, you need a working understanding of color vocabulary. Okay? Color concepts, color theory, color vocab, and design principles are just intertwined like this. And so, if you do not have a working knowledge of color theory, color vocab, I encourage you to watch the video that I uploaded on Wednesday. It is my pertinent color lessons rendered into one long video in the order that I think you should learn them. Okay, I uploaded that just last Wednesday. That should be the most recent video after this one. And go watch it as a refresher, or maybe it's the first time you've ever heard of color theory. But here's the deal. When you go to art school, most freshmen, they take a class called color and design. No matter what kind of art and design discipline they're going to study, you take color and design. And in the first half of that class is color, and the second half of that class are design principles. That's how intrinsically linked they are. So go please study a bit of color vocab or take a refresher. I will wait. Okay, are you ready to study design principles? In this video, we're going to cover emphasis. And emphasis is basically like the point where you want people to pay the most attention to your garment. Okay? And you can have a couple of different points of emphasis, a couple of different focal points, but really it's like, look here, please. Okay? Emphasis. It's like punctuation. It's like you want to emphasize something. You can bold it. You can italicize it. You can put it in an asterisk and quotation marks, italics, whatever you want. Okay? But we are going to create emphasis in garments by using contrast. If you want something to pop, we're going to create some kind of contrast to make the thing pop, okay? Like, let's say that you are launching a line of jewelry to go with your clothing line, and this is the first collection that you're showing your jewelry, and you have like this amazing brooch, and you want everyone to really pay attention to it, and it's like bejeweled and covered in, pearls and gold. If you want people to pay attention to that brooch, you're not going to put it on a white dress so that the pearls can kind of like blend and harmonize with the white. No, you're going to put it on like a black ground, a dark, like some other dark, matte, unpatterned ground, so that the pearls and the gold and the details and all the big brooch really stand out against the matte, flat black. Okay? And so let's go over a bunch of different ways that you can create visual emphasis in your garments. You can think about scale, small versus large. This is like the basis of proportions, okay? Like a lot of 80s style depended on these huge t-shirts and these big blazers with massive shoulder pads, with these teeny tiny little mini skirts, really skinny leggings, to create that, to emphasize the size difference, to emphasize this proportion, to emphasize the how big the blazer was by pairing it with something so skinny on the bottom. Similarly, you can think of things in terms of thick and thin, and that can be like a really fat fabrication for a coat versus something really thin on the bottom. You could think of things in terms of light and heavy, something fluffy and airy and light, like chiffon bows next to something really heavy and stark, to really emphasize how beautifully you got this pussycat bow out of the chiffon. It's the fluffy and soft next to the hard and dark and solid. Okay, creating that emphasis by creating that contrast. You can play with organic shape versus geometric shape. Okay, Richard Quinn does this a lot, where he puts these beautiful, roughly flowy flower print dresses on these black latex bodysuits, or he pairs them with very geometric patterns to really create that contrast for those beautiful florals to stand away from the body and really emphasize the shape, the softness, the scale, the beautiful flowers up against the latex. You can create a color contrast, light and dark values. You can do like a pale pink over a burgundy. Okay. And really that contrast is so much more than to put a red and a burgundy, where they are more harmonizing and more monochromatic. So that means you can do something that is transparent next to opaque. That's another contrast. You could do warm temperature color versus cool temperature color. So we've got like your reds, your yellows, and your oranges versus your blues and greens and purples, and put those next to each other to create a contrast. And if you studied color vocab, then you know that complementary color schemes are the most contrast. And so putting, red and green together. Okay, if you wanted to apply the value concept, we could put a baby pink next to a hunter green, that dark hunter green. So we've got light versus dark with two complementary colors that are creating double emphasis. If you wanted to do that, we could do like hunter green in sequence. So you've got the texture, you've got the shine, you've got the dark, you've got the green, and then the pale pink, let's say a pebble crepe, and it's drapey and it's soft, but it's a solid color and it's matte and it's pink. It's like all the opposite things as the other to create like how these two things are so distinctly different from each other. And you are emphasizing how soft and flowy and drapey and beautiful the baby pink pebble crepe is versus how shiny and sparkly and high impact that the hunter green sparkles can be. Okay. Putting those contrasts next to each other makes each other look more. They look more, just more everything. When it comes to studying emphasis through contrast and focal points, I can just, run a search, just Google Schiaparelli, and I don't even have to look at a specific collection because Daniel Roseberry loves playing with contrasts. Okay, look at this dress, the lobster. Of course, it is definitely a Schiaparelli signature, but it's distinctly like, hey, we are putting this on this cream fabric. The red is going to pop out with this cream ground. We're not trying to harmonize with the lobster. We're really emphasizing the lobster because it is a Schiaparelli, brand house code. So we're making that bam. And sometimes when you have something that's like one iconic image, it can look a little abrupt and it can look like it doesn't really tie in with the rest. And so the belt in that similar color family really helps bring it together. And this is the OG from back in the day. We have the lobster on the off-white ground. The lobster is huge. It's on the skirt. It's in red. But then it has like another thing to play back on, which is the red of the waist. Here is another one, more recent. There's so many contrasts here. So we have the matte black versus the shiny black. And in that, you emphasize the, Schiaparelli loves to play with human anatomy. And so the whole musculature mold of this upper body piece so shiny, so lumpy, whatever, contrasts with the matte black of the skirt. So we're already emphasizing the top, but the main emphasis, the main focal point is this bow. So we have, number one, a color that is so different. Number two, black doesn't have a temperature. It can go either way, but we have a neutral versus a bright saturated color. Number two, we have a lighter color. Okay, this is still it's a medium value, but it's like a, high value, lighter color versus black. We have this satin taffeta that is, in terms of shine and highlights, in between the high shine of the top and the matte of the skirt. So we're playing with three essential areas where they're harshly contrasting one another because you really want to play with those contrasts there. Would this gold stand out as spectacularly as it does now if it weren't for the black ground? What other color could there be where the gold just stood out so magnificently? This was one of my favorite looks when this collection first came out. I would kill for this jacket. Black with the gold fake hair reminiscent. Oh, and the toes on the boots, that is definitely a focal point, deliberately making those toes gold, another anatomy reference. The rest of the shoe is it's black, it's leather, it's not like anatomically perfect. The toes are articulated so much, okay? The toes are articulated in ways that the rest of the boot is not. The rest of the boot is articulated like a boot. But the toes are very just carved out in gold. Pay attention, because if the toes were in black, only people who got to see the boots up close would have noticed, and they wouldn't have been as splashy. The emphasis, the focal point wouldn't have been there. It wouldn't have been so spectacular. This whole thing with, do I need to say more? This is one of those things where you're creating multiple points of emphasis to make your eye bounce around. And we're going to talk more about that when we talk about rhythm and movement, when something is static, but it's like the black versus the baby blue, the gold on top of the black, the gold versus the black, and then you have a bejeweled crotch. And so it's these your eye keeps bouncing back and forth places because you have these hot spot places of high contrast. If you created an embellishment that beautiful, would you blur it out by putting it on top of a gold fabric where the edges and the details and the crispness of the lines got lost in the low contrast of the backdrop? You could. That would really produce a real different look though, okay? It would not be as high drama as this. And contrast often creates drama. Something like this, you do need the contrast. This is definitely the focal point, big old flower. But if the backdrop were also the same color, you would kind of lose the flower in there. And you would also kind of lose the body. Okay. As it is, you're kind of losing the body because so much of the torso is covered. But because it's so distinctly a flower on top of a dress, you're kind of getting the feeling of here is a body under there. Whereas if the whole thing were in this similar color, you kind of lose, it would just sort of flow into this sort of blob, and then the flower starts growing arms and legs, and it becomes a completely different thing. I love this look. I drew it in another older video, but definitely the wild side seam ruffles, it would have to be in a contrast, because if not, you lose the body, okay? You're really with the style lines in which the ruffles are kind of coming out, you're seeing a very hourglassy figure. Again, the anatomy reference. And with the gold along the top edge, you're really focusing on, look at the curves of this body, look at these crazy, crinkly aluminum foil ruffles, but that contrast is making sure that we don't lose the body in there, and that focus is there, that it's still a dress in there. The body is the focus in there. This is something that I had mentioned, I think, in a runway review where everyone was obsessed with these fake animal heads, and they were all done on these otherwise extremely simple gowns, like a very huge, complex animal head on a simple gown. And yeah, the emphasis is, look at the amazing craftsmanship behind this massive lion head. And I get that. It's just, to me, it felt a little abrupt. Like, I needed some kind of transition. I needed something else. But again, this is one of those things where you look at the emphasis, you look at the contrast, and wonder if that is the correct design decision for the entire garment. Here's an example of Schiaparelli gold embroidery without a black ground that's still so high contrast that is the focal point. That is the emphasis. The embroidery is the emphasis. It looks amazing. Just super high contrast, but without the black. Black is not the only option. Okay, so think about what colors also work. We have a very cool pink with a warm gold. We have a beautiful shiny texture versus a flat pink, like a flat matte background with such a shocking pink. Okay, so those contrasts are also playful and create that contrast. And this is really more about the illustration, but a green cape with a soft red gown, creating those complementary color schemes really makes you focus in on the central figure, and the backdrop becomes it still harmonizes because you get a feel for the split complementary color scheme, and so it all works together color composition wise, but it's definitely not as important as the contrast that's created by the green and the red. All right. So, no geeky tutorial series could be complete without homework. I have 2 homework assignments for you. The first one, I want you to start paying more attention to the world around you and start looking for different areas of emphasis through contrast in your life, and start taking some photos of the most interesting ones. And I want to train your eye. This is the first assignment. Is not about like finding the most remarkable areas of contrast you've ever seen in your life, but to train your eye to pay attention. I think this is also kind of leads into when I tell you to get inspiration images and you're kind of like, I don't understand what that means. It's like, train your eye to see different things in a new way so that later on when you're gathering images for your inspiration, you know how to use them. But we'll get there. We'll get there. It's a very geeky series. We're going to get there. But I want you to look at the world around you. And even if it's like something that's like an organic shape, like a tree in front of a brick house. And if that happened to be a green tree in front of a red brick house, complementary colors, that would be even better. And if you saw a teeny tiny flower growing out of a crack in a sidewalk, that organic versus the solid inorganic, the soft versus the very hard and flat, the beautiful color versus the dead neutral, like looking at these contrasts, finding the contrast, seeing these points of emphasis. You could be looking at miles of sidewalk, but that point where you see the flower growing out of the crack in the sidewalk, that's going to be the focal point. That's the part where you notice something different. You notice something, even if you see like random pebbles strewn around here and there, it's like probably the similar color as the concrete. You're not really paying that attention, but a beautiful, colorful little flower growing with all those different elements about it that are different from the concrete, you notice it. So I want you to start paying attention to just ordinary objects, ordinary surroundings, and start picking at different contrasts and start thinking about how you could apply these elements to fashion. In the first video where I used this backdrop, I asked people what they thought, and I didn't get too much of a response. A lot of people were kind of like, we're just interested in listening to you talk. Your background doesn't matter. But when I edit these videos, I have to look at myself with this backdrop a lot. And here's the thing. There's not enough contrast between my preferred wardrobe, black, and this dark brown wood. And so it's a little bit like, before it was better because I had the blonde wood and my black clothed body with my dark hair was very much the focal point in the backdrop of birch wood. Okay, do you see how it gives a different feel? Okay, so these are all things where the contrast creates a different sort of vibe, and you have to decide whether that's something that you're going for. I have not made up my mind about this backdrop. This studio is smaller than my old studio, so I may not have a choice, but we'll see. The next part of homework is I want you to start looking at runway collections or editorial photo shoots or wherever you can see pictures of clothes. And I want you to really pay attention to the clothes, like individual garments, than whole outfits. Well, unless you're studying to be a stylist, then you should study whole outfits and how they're put together. But for designers, I want you to start thinking about looking at individual garments and look at where there are areas of emphasis created by contrast and whether you think it is successful. I often think that sometimes something could use more harmonizing or more of a transition. And so emphasis through contrast is not always the goal. It is a goal. It is a design principle that you can use in your work, but it's not always going to be the answer you're looking for when you're putting a garment together. And so I want you to look through a bunch of clothes, whether it's your favorite designer or not, and pick out the areas of emphasis, and you decide, make notes on whether you think that that was a successful move on the part of the designer to go with that color combo, to go with those contrasting textures, those contrasting fabrics, what have you. Okay? And by studying them and training your eye to look at them, you're training your eye to be more critical of design. Critical, not meaning you're just going to badmouth everything, but to be able to analyze something and say, oh, that looks great because the contrast, really brings out X, which is the most beautiful part of this garment. Or it looks so abrupt. It just cuts the person off in such an unflattering way. It's just, and it looks weird, like training your eye. With these two exercises, as you start purposefully thinking about design principles like emphasis, you're training your brain. And as you purposefully start applying these design principles to your own design work, eventually you're going to get to a point where it will be automatic for you to look at a garment that you think isn't quite working, and you're going to start clicking through the design principles that and be like, is this a place where emphasis is going to be the answer? Is this a place where the proportions need reworking, what have you? And then it's going to start becoming more ingrained in you, like brain muscle memory, as you start doing these things more purposefully. Okay, I want you to train your brain in this way to study design principles and apply them to your own work. All right. As usual, drop me your questions. Let me know what you think of this new series, and I will see you in the next video.